The film opens with Ethan and Sophie recounting to their marriage counselor the story of their first encounter. They reminisce about meeting at a party, describing the experience as magical. One thing led to another, and they spontaneously ended up in a neighbor's pool. The twist came when the neighbor, unexpectedly at home, burst out in anger. This unplanned adventure turned out to be the most exhilarating night of their lives. They reveal to the therapist that they attempted to replicate this incident on their anniversary, but it didn't have the same thrill. Nobody interrupted them this time. Sophie expresses her sadness, noting how happiness once came effortlessly but now feels out of reach. She expresses a desire to trust and forgive Ethan, yet they find themselves at odds over the path to reconciliation. The therapist recommends a retreat to the couple, suggesting it as an opportunity to press the reset button on their relationship. He mentions that everyone he sent there has returned with a renewed spirit. Upon arriving at the retreat, Ethan and Sophie find it stunningly beautiful, yet an uncomfortable silence lingers between them. Ethan, while exploring, he discovers a house called the Coop, where he finds a computer and a recording setup. Further exploration leads him to a guest house, inside which is a book filled with glowing reviews from previous visitors, praising the retreat's wonderful atmosphere. In the main house, Ethan prepares a delightful dinner. They enjoy some wine, smoke pot, and start to unwind. Ethan mentions the guest house he came across. After dinner, as Ethan takes care of the cleanup, Sophie decides to explore and ends up at the guest house. She is pleasantly surprised to find Ethan already there. They spend a playful evening together, which even leads to them making love. They express their love for each other, and their relationship seems to be flourishing. Opting to spend the night at the guest house, Sophie heads back to the main house to change clothes. However, she is baffled to find Ethan asleep on the couch. Confused, she questions how he moved so quickly. Ethan, equally puzzled, asks why she is sweaty. Sophie, assuming it's obvious from their recent intimate encounter, laughs it off, but Ethan's confusion only grows. Frustrated by what she perceives as Ethan's attempt to spoil the night, Sophie decides to go to bed alone. Ethan returns to the guest house and notices remnants of their romantic evening. He smokes some pot and eventually dozes off on the couch. Sophie comes in, snuggles up to him, and Ethan, feeling remorseful, apologizes and professes his love for her. The next morning, he wakes to find Sophie preparing breakfast, curiously cooking bacon despite her usual aversion to it when he eats it. He brings up their odd argument from the previous night, wondering if it was influenced by the wine or pot, but Sophie appears unfazed, recalling the night as wonderful. Confused, Ethan goes back to the main house, where he encounters an irritated Sophie emerging from the bathroom. He quickly takes her to the main house to show her that it's empty and devoid of any signs of breakfast. Outside, he tries to make sense of the bizarre events and explains the strange happenings to her. Ethan, curious to test a theory, ventures alone into the guest house and is surprised to see Sophie emerging from the shower. He rushes back to tell the real Sophie that he just handed a towel to her inside. Sophie, no longer angry but frightened, decides to investigate the guest house herself. She finds a cheerful Ethan doing morning exercises. After seeing this, she comes out and informs Ethan that he is inside, exercising. Realizing the bizarre situation, they quickly pack their bags and leave the retreat. They stop for coffee to discuss the unnerving experience. Despite their initial inclination to dismiss it, they find themselves unable to forget what happened. They ponder whether they should return and delve deeper into the mystery. Sophie recalls the experience as magical, insisting it wasn't just the influence of weed and that she felt safe. She believes revisiting the guest house could benefit their relationship. Ethan, however, finds it unsettling that she slept with his doppelganger. They return to the guest house, agreeing on a strategy where they enter individually, as the phenomenon seems to only occur under those conditions. Ethan goes in first and is greeted by a breakfast and a cheerful Sophie who expresses that she missed him. He cautiously interacts with her, finding her behavior completely normal. After exiting, Ethan shares his experience with the real Sophie. They establish some basic rules for their unusual encounters: to enjoy the experience but leave immediately if either feels uncomfortable, avoid intimacy, refrain from spying, and maintain honesty about their experiences. They agree on limiting each visit to 15 minutes. When it's Sophie's turn, Ethan sets a timer on his phone. Inside, she is pleasantly surprised to find Ethan painting her portrait. They enjoy drinks together and engage in a pleasant conversation. In the main house, Ethan notices that Sophie has been in the guest house for over 15 minutes. Concerned, he heads over and peers through a window, only to see the alternate Ethan giving Sophie a back massage. Sophie notices him watching and decides to leave. During dinner back in the main house, Sophie mentions that the other Ethan reminds her of how Ethan used to be. That night, Ethan wakes up and claims he wants to have his 15-minute session in the guest house. Instead, he secretly places his phone with an audio recording app activated in the guest house, then returns to sleep in the main house. The next morning, Sophie is seen having a lively chat with the other Ethan in the guest house. After she leaves, Ethan sneaks back in to retrieve his phone, but it's missing. The alternate Sophie appears and hands him the phone with the recorder. Back outside, when Ethan tries to listen to the recording, he finds it's just garbled noise and static. Sophie's next visit to the guest house finds the alternate Ethan playfully suggesting a game of tic-tac-toe in the loft. During the game, he expresses his longing for her kisses, hinting at a romantic moment between them before the scene cuts away. That evening, back in the main house, Sophie receives a text from the other Ethan, prompting laughter. The real Ethan finds it odd that this alternate version of himself possesses a phone. The following morning, Sophie confronts Ethan about his past infidelity. Ethan admits to his mistake, attributing it to their relationship troubles at the time. He expresses gratitude for Sophie staying with him and appreciates her efforts to salvage their marriage. This moment of honesty leads to a kiss between them. The following morning, Ethan initiates a conversation with Sophie, expressing his confusion about the events of the weekend. He admits that he isn't the type of person who does sit-ups and struggles with the idea of being attracted to another version of her. He seeks assurance from her that she feels the same way. Later that afternoon, Ethan checks his phone and discovers a series of bizarre messages. One message is from a man annoyed about receiving a call from Ethan at 2 a.m., advising him to consult Sophie next time he can't recall his address. Ethan returns to the main house and shares with Sophie about the strange phone calls. He suspects that the other Ethan made those calls, but she dismisses the idea, believing he wouldn't do such a thing. Ethan then tells Sophie he's going to the store, but instead he secretly parks outside and observes the guest house. He waits and, as the real Sophie is about to enter the guest house through the front door, Ethan slips in through the side door, impersonating the other Ethan. Sophie opens up to him, expressing how this version of Ethan is everything she's wanted, especially in how he talks about her feelings. She admits to being conflicted and unable to stop thinking about this experience. Unaware of Ethan's deception, she ends up having sex with him, believing he is the alternate Ethan. After this encounter, a disheartened Ethan makes his way back to the main house. Ethan later visits the guest house again, this time to confront the alternate Sophie. He bluntly tells her she isn't real and questions her identity and nature. He confesses his struggle to enjoy their weekend getaway, fearing that it might be the time when he loses his wife. The other Sophie responds insightfully, suggesting that their marital issues extend beyond just this weekend, claiming to know these things as his wife. Subsequently, back at the main house, Ethan observes Sophie leaving the guest house, pausing briefly, and then re-entering. Inside, the other Ethan and the real Sophie are caught up in a playful and intimate moment. The real Ethan approaches, leading to a tense encounter with Sophie as she steps outside to meet him. They engage in a heated argument about the situation and then head back to the main house together. Once back in the main house, Ethan and Sophie are met by their alternate counterparts, who suggest that it's time for all four of them to properly interact. A pleasant dinner party ensues, but the real Ethan remains noticeably uneasy, in contrast to the apparent contentment of the others, including the real Sophie. During a conversation between the two Sophies, the alternate Sophie probes into whether the real Sophie is more troubled by what she and the real Ethan did, or by what the other Ethan shared with her about his time with the real Sophie. Emphasizing the importance of enjoying the evening, the alternate Sophie proposes that they should drop any pretense of liking each other and instead focus on trying to have fun. Outside the main house, the two Ethans engage in a conversation. The real Ethan accuses the alternate Ethan of attempting to ruin his relationship, but the other Ethan counters, suggesting that the real Ethan is sabotaging his own relationship. Inside, the atmosphere shifts as the two couples play cards together. The alternate Ethan becomes the center of attention, charming everyone and adding life to the party. The real Sophie is visibly enjoying herself, which irritates the real Ethan. During the game, the alternate Ethan reveals to the real Sophie about Ethan's earlier deception. Upset by this revelation, Sophie asks the real Ethan to leave. Following her request, the real Ethan departs and heads to the Coop house. There, he discovers a computer containing files on past guests, including one on him and Sophie. He stumbles upon an audio recording of a couple practicing their impersonations to sound just like them. The real Ethan, now at the guest house, attempts to leave but realizes he's locked inside. He can hear the sounds of the other three. Morning, the alternate Sophie visits the guest house. She reveals to the real Ethan that the alternate Ethan has developed feelings for the real Sophie, an unexpected turn of events. The original plan was for the real Sophie to fall out of love with the real Ethan, which would allow the alternate versions to take their place and become them. Once this transition occurs, it would then be the real Ethan and Sophie's turn to remain trapped. The fact that Ethan couldn't leave the house indicates that this transformation is gradually taking place. Meanwhile, at the main house, the real Sophie and the alternate Ethan are preparing for a hike. The alternate Sophie arrives and deceitfully orchestrates a meeting between the real Sophie and the real Ethan. In a deceptive maneuver, she dons one of the real Sophie's shirts and approaches the alternate Ethan, leading him to mistakenly believe she is the real Sophie. This intricate exchange of identities adds another layer of complexity to the unfolding events. During a candid conversation, the real Ethan and Sophie reflect on the weekend's events. Realizing something is amiss, the alternate Ethan becomes frantic, searching the house for the real Sophie. Meanwhile, the real Ethan and Sophie secure themselves in a room. In this private moment, the real Ethan reassures Sophie of his love. He acknowledges he may not be as impressive as his alternate version, but he is her husband and is determined not to lose her, pleading for another chance. The tension escalates when the alternate Ethan forcefully breaks down the door, leading to a direct confrontation with the real couple. In the heat of the moment, the alternate Ethan pleads with the real Sophie to leave with him. However, she refuses. In a desperate bid for freedom, the alternate Ethan rushes out of the house, only to be halted by an invisible force field that renders him unconscious upon impact. Realizing the urgency of the situation, the real Ethan tells the two Sophies that they need to leave immediately. He quickly takes action, grabbing Sophie and making their escape from the bizarre scenario. The following morning, the couple finds themselves safe and feeling more secure in their marriage. Sophie heads to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. When Ethan inquires about the meal and she responds with bacon, he is struck by a sudden realization. He might have escaped with the wrong Sophie. Contemplating this possibility, he decides to join her, remarking, "I'll be right there."